How do you lose $100 billion in market value in less than a decade? In 2007, BlackBerry held a massive 50% share of the smartphone industry. Their encryption made them completely untouchable. But 3,000 miles away, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and changed the rules of the game forever. Behind closed doors, BlackBerry's leadership made a definitive strategic choice. It seemed perfectly logical at the time, but it would ultimately trigger a total corporate execution. This is how one decision destroyed an empire. By 2008, this device wasn't just a tool, it was a physical manifestation of power and status. Every celebrity, every sports star, every businessman, everyone had one. It earned the nickname Crackberry because users literally could not put it down. If you wanted to look important, you had to have one. It created a completely new psychological habit. People were checking emails under boardroom tables, at dinner dates, and in taxi cabs. It was the world's first true taste of 24/7 digital addiction. But their real empire wasn't built on celebrity hype, it was built here, in the servers. BlackBerry built a proprietary enterprise network so secure that global governments and central banks strictly banned their employees from using anything else. But while they conquered the boardroom, a secondary empire was forming completely by accident. They launched BlackBerry Messenger, BM, a closed, encrypted, instant messaging network. Suddenly, millions of teenagers didn't want a phone to make calls. They wanted a BlackBerry just to get a BBM pin. It created the earliest, most aggressive mobile network effect on Earth. You bought the phone just because your friends had it. By mid-2008, the company's valuation exploded past $80 billion. They were printing cash, controlling 50% of the market, and expanding faster than any mobile hardware manufacturer in history. BlackBerry had built the perfect corporate fortress. It was completely impenetrable, until their biggest strength instantly turned into their fatal weakness. January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs walks onto a stage in San Francisco and pulls a single device out of his pocket. No physical keys, just a massive, smooth sheet of capacitive glass. The entire mobile industry instantly realizes the rules of physics just changed. Behind closed doors in Waterloo, Barry's engineering team was in a state of absolute disbelief. They literally tore the iPhone apart, convinced it was a mechanical hoax. They thought Apple was lying about the battery life. But while the engineers panicked, the billionaires at the top weren't sweating at all. Barry's co-CEOs publicly laughed at the iPhone, calling it an expensive, battery-draining toy. They assumed enterprise customers would never give up corporate security for a touchscreen. They chose to protect their keyboard moat at all costs. BlackBerry was laughing, but their biggest cellular partners were in a blind panic. AT&T had locked down exclusive rights to the iPhone, and millions of users were switching networks just to get it. Verizon, losing its grip on the premium market, handed BlackBerry an absolute ultimatum: build us an iPhone killer right now. Under immense pressure from carriers, BlackBerry broke their core philosophy and rushed a weapon to market. They couldn't build a fluid touch interface in time, so they engineered a bizarre, desperate hardware compromise: a clickable screen. A touch surface where the entire physical piece of glass clicked down like a single giant button. In late 2008, the BlackBerry Storm hit shelves. It was a complete and utter disaster. The software was painfully laggy. The experimental clicking screen jammed constantly, and tech reviewers absolutely savaged it. Virtually every single device shipped was returned, costing the company $500 million. The empire's armor was officially shattered. Despite the Storm disaster, BlackBerry's financials were actively lying to them. Because corporate contracts were locked in for years, their subscriber base actually grew to an all-time high of 80 million users by 2011. This massive wave of delayed revenue blinded leadership to the fact that the consumer market had completely vanished underneath them. Before Apple took over the world, this single device ruled planet Earth. But in 2011, the ground beneath BlackBerry completely shifted as a new digital gold rush began. Silicon Valley developers weren't building for corporate servers anymore. They were building for the App Store. While iOS and Android built thriving app ecosystems, BlackBerry's operating system was stuck in the past. It was incredibly difficult for developers to code for, meaning viral apps like Instagram, Uber, and Angry Birds simply skipped BlackBerry entirely. Millions of teenagers abandoned BBM because their friends on iPhone had an entire universe of apps they couldn't access. Inside headquarters, the crisis triggered a brutal internal civil war between the co-CEOs. One faction wanted to scrap everything and buy a modern operating system, while the other insisted on protecting the physical keyboard at all costs. This corporate paralysis left them completely frozen as Android aggressively captured the low and mid-tier markets globally. By early 2012, investors completely lost patience with the internal paralysis and corporate gridlock. Under immense pressure, the dual billionaire co-CEOs officially stepped down, ending a historic co-leadership era. Even with consumers completely gone, leadership still believed their core enterprise market was safe. They assumed elite corporate CEOs and global government officials would never sacrifice their secure physical keys. But a massive new trend in corporate IT departments was about to shatter that illusion entirely. It was called Bring Your Own Device, the sudden, massive corporate shift toward workplace personalization. Corporate employees openly rebelled against carrying a boring work phone alongside their personal touchscreens. They demanded their corporate IT departments secure iPhones and Androids for official business mail instead. Under immense pressure from executives, IT departments gave in and built custom security software. This instantly dissolved BlackBerry's single greatest competitive moat and exclusive grip on enterprise infrastructure. The corporate security shield that made them completely untouchable was officially dead and buried. What followed was one of the fastest, most brutal market share collapses in tech history. Their global smartphone market dominance plummets heavily from 50% straight down to single digits. To survive the cash bleeding, the company announced massive, historic corporate workforce cuts. They laid off over 40% of their entire global staff in a single, devastating sweep. Entire engineering divisions in Waterloo were completely cleared out, leaving empty office complexes behind. In a final, desperate move to find value, they spun off BlackBerry Messenger as a standalone app. They launched BBM on iOS and Android, hoping to capture a massive multi-platform chat network. But alternatives like WhatsApp had already entirely conquered the market, rendering BBM completely irrelevant. They laughed at the first iPhone. It cost them their entire empire, and their first attempt to fight back would only accelerate the bleeding. Now, with hardware completely dead, the company had to make the ultimate choice: adapt or vanish. Psychologists call this specific corporate blindness status quo bias, an intense emotional preference for the current state of affairs. When a brain experiences massive success, it creates a powerful chemical reward loop tied to the specific actions that created that success. For BlackBerry, their reward circuitry was hardwired to the physical click of a plastic keyboard, making the touchscreen feel like an existential threat to their identity. This triggers a cognitive bias known as functional fixedness, where a person can only see an object operating in its traditional use case. BlackBerry executives looked at a phone and could only see a text-based tool meant for reading emails and corporate memos. They were completely blind to the fact that consumers were shifting toward a device meant for cognitive distraction and lifestyle entertainment. As the iPhone began gaining massive traction, behavioral science explains their disastrous response through the sunk cost fallacy. Instead of abandoning their failing platform, they doubled down, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into forcing a keyboard onto a touchscreen layout. The more resources they wasted on the broken Storm prototype, the more psychologically committed they became to a fundamentally flawed strategy. The collapse of BlackBerry confirms that empires do not fail because of bad luck or superior competitor engineering. They fail because psychological defense mechanisms actively shield decision makers from uncomfortable, disruptive truths. Corporate execution is almost always preceded by a quiet, collective psychological suicide inside the boardroom. To survive a massive paradigm shift, an organization must be willing to completely destroy its own historical identity. It requires an executive team capable of overriding their deep-seated cognitive biases, and as BlackBerry faced total liquidation in 2016, that psychological reset was the only card left to play. In late 2016, the company officially waved the white flag on their iconic device division. The newly appointed CEO announced that BlackBerry would permanently stop manufacturing its own internal hardware. An era defined by the physical keyboard had officially come to a close. They strip away the hardware entirely, and BlackBerry still owned incredibly secure enterprise infrastructure. They completely quietly pivoted from a phone maker into an enterprise cybersecurity software company. They began selling high-end threat encryption systems directly to banks, healthcare networks, and global transport fields. They expanded their secure microkernel software into a highly dominant automotive operating system called QNX. Today, their invisible, encrypted software quietly powers the dashboards of over 200 million vehicles worldwide. You likely drive a car powered by BlackBerry technology without ever realizing it's there. Today, BlackBerry is a profitable enterprise software entity, completely divorced from its old public image. They survived the crash, but at the cost of losing their entire public-facing consumer identity. It remains one of the greatest, most extreme pivot stories in the entire history of Silicon Valley. The collapse offers a chilling case study taught in business schools across the planet.